Hello everyone and welcome to the summer workshop. My name is Dave Fehr and I'm a project specialist here at Friesen Yearbooks. In this session we're going to go over the toolbar in InDesign. Now, the toolbar has a lot of different tools in there, often for cropping photos, for placing text, creating frames, all those different things that you'll do on a regular basis with your layouts. There are some tools in there that I may not go over or may not touch simply because they may not be relevant to your book or maybe not efficient for what you're going to be doing for creating pages. So let's get right to it. So to go over the toolbar, what we want to do is we want to first start off by making sure the tools appear on your InDesign program on your screen. So here they're appearing on the left-hand side. You can see all the tools on the left-hand side here. You might see it also as a narrower toolbar or wider, depending what your preference is. If you don't see that toolbar on the left-hand side, you can find it by going into the window menu, going down to tools, and clicking on that, and that will automatically have that toolbar appear. And typically it'll be on the left side of your InDesign program. So first thing we want to do is we want to go over some of the tools. I'll go from the top to the bottom. I'm going to go start with the selection tool. So the selection tool is your general selection tool. So if you want to click on an object, highlight it, move it, do basic modifications to it, the selection tool is the one you want to use. So in this case, if I were to click onto this image here, it'll highlight this image. You'll notice that a blue frame comes around this image. It also has these little boxes on the corners in the middle. Those are anchor points, and those can be used to modify and manipulate that particular image box. And so if I click onto the sides here, these anchor points, I click and drag, you'll notice that I can change the size of the frame. Now the image itself doesn't change. It doesn't resize the image. It doesn't recrop the images. It just moves where your frame location is. So I can use that on the sides and the corners. Now the direct selection tool is right beside it. The direct selection tool actually does something slightly different. It'll actually select the content of those frames. So I'm going to click onto the direct selection tool and click on my image. Now you'll notice that the blue outline isn't there anymore. It doesn't have the anchor points right where the image edges are. It now shows where the entire image is located. Now you can only see certain parts of it because of the frame. The frame itself cuts that off. That's the cropping of it. So I can click and drag and I can resize and move this image inside of that frame using this direct selection tool. I can also do is I can resize the photo by clicking any one of these anchor points and dragging in any direction to create that different size. Now it's always very important whenever you resize a photo and you're clicking and dragging, you want to make sure you hold down your shift key so that the image will be sized proportionally and not stretched. So for example, if I hold down the shift key and reduce the size of the photo, it does it proportionally. If I were to grab one of these other anchor points and just click and drag, it would actually stretch that photo, and that's not what you want for your book. So I'm going to undo that and stretch the photo back to fit the frame size. Another thing that it can do is you can actually change the frame edges slightly differently than the selection tool can. So I'm going to go on the very edge of this frame here, and I'm going to highlight it. And you'll notice that you see those anchor points in the corners. They're very small. You can't see them very easily now because they're much smaller. So what I can do is I can grab these anchor points and I can now change them independently of the actual frame itself. So if I click and drag here, you notice that I'm just changing that one anchor point and everything else kind of stays locked in place. So now you can manipulate and modify your frames with those small anchor points in place. Go ahead and undo that. The next tool in the tool panel you're going to see is called the Pages tool. Now, Pages tool is not a page tool you're going to work with or use in your program. It basically modifies the actual page itself, whether it changes the size. It can actually modify the placement of a page up and down. This is not a tool you want to use for yearbook creation or spreads, so we're going to avoid going through that tool this time around. Beside that, we have our gap tool. This could be a very handy tool depending on where your photos are. Let's say if you want to change the location of the photos, but you want to keep the gap between the photos the exact same as it was before. So for example, I have two images side by side here. If I hover into the middle of those two images in the gap, you'll see that there's double arrow showing up. And this will allow me to click and drag and to resize those frame boxes so that the gap stays the same, but the frame boxes now change. And so you can do that between any particular box or frames that you have, including text boxes and headlines. You can change different sizes of all those different boxes and tools. Anything that's sitting side by side. You can also change the gap on your side of your page. So if your content is a little too close to the edge of the page, you can use the gap tool to slightly modify it or change it to move it in and out as you need to. Next tool you're going to see is a content collector and content placer. And those particular tools just allow you to take content from your page, and using the content placer tool, you can place those elements back on your page elsewhere. Now, if you're working with 2-page spreads, I could recommend for all your book spreads. You're not going to really utilize this tool a whole lot. It's more for an InDesign file that have 10, 20, 30 pages where you're collecting content from one page and you're transferring it to another page further down the line. So in this case, we're not going to go over that tool. We're going to go into the text tool next. So if you click on the text tool, you'll see this is a very simple tool. Click and drag anywhere on the spread. Create a text box. As soon as you click and drag and create the text box, your options of font, size, all those different font features are now on the top control bar. If I were to click and hold onto the text tool, I would see a type on a path tool. And so this is a different tool than the regular type tool. This will allow you to put text on an object. So for example, I'm going to quickly draw an object on the page on the side here. I'm going to go into the type on a path tool, and I'm going to hover over top of the frame edge, and you'll notice when I do that, there's a little plus symbol that shows up right beside the cursor. And so wherever I click on it, where the plus symbol shows, and now has a little flashing cursor on that particular frame edge. And when I start to type, you'll see that the object or the text is now attached to that frame edge. And if I go back to my selection tool, you can see now that the frame is selected and I have text here on that particular frame. Now there's a couple of different tools inside of that selection tool that you can use. One of them is to invert this text, so I can click and drag this little line here on the bottom. Now it inverts that text and puts it on the inside. There is also an ability to change the location and the start and the stop location of that text by clicking and dragging these small little lines that are either in front of the text or behind the text. You can see that there's lines here back and forth that I can do that with. Alternatively, what you can do is you can go into the type menu. You go into the type on a path option, and you'll see that there's an options panel that you can open up. Now you can choose the different effects you want, and so there's several different effects you can choose to change your text, whether you want to skew it or change how it's shaped, how it looks. You can flip it to the inside or the outside using this tool as well, change it to the center of the line or the bottom, top, things like that. And change the spacing. A lot of different options you can do here. You can also delete that type on a path so it no longer appears. Next tool we're going to go over is the line tool. Very simple, very basic. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my spread over a little bit here. And if I were just to click and drag, it creates just a regular straight line that you can use for putting gaps on pages, putting below headlines to separation pieces, whatever you want to do, you can click and drag and do that. Now if you were to hold your shift key while you're clicking and dragging, you would create a perfect 45 or a vertical horizontal line. So it'll snap to those different angles for you if you hold down your shift key. Once you have your line set, you can go into a stroke panel on the right hand side, and you can choose the thickness of the stroke. You can go into your swatches panel, and you can also change the color and the different settings for that as well. The next tool we have is the pen tool. And before I use the pen tool, I'm going to just create some space here by deleting some of my objects. So this is where the selection tool comes into play. I can click and drag and highlight a number of objects all at one time, hit delete on my keyboard, and now those objects are gone and I can move forward with my next tool. So with the pen tool here, if you click and hold, you'll see that there's a number of different options here. There's a pen tool, add anchor point, delete anchor point, and a convert direction tool. And so we're going to use all 4 of these as I'm drawing an object. But I'm going to start with the pen tool first. Pen tool allows you to create a custom shaped frame. So in this case, if I want to just choose a location and click my mouse button once, you can see I've created an anchor point. It's a tiny blue little point. That's your starting anchor point. Then I can go down to another location, click again, it creates another anchor point. And then we'll continue to do that as I click on anchor points. And then when I get to the final anchor point where I want to finish this object, if you go to the original anchor point you started, you'll see that their cursor shows a tiny little circle image right when you click on that anchor point, and that allows you to finish that path and complete that particular object. So now this is basically a custom shaped frame that you can put text or images into. So for example, I'm going to click onto my selection tool. You can see that it highlights it just like a regular frame or a regular object. I can click and use these corner anchor points to make it smaller or larger or stretch it however I want. Or I can go to my file menu, go into the place option, find an image I want to place into there, hit open, and it places the image inside of that photo frame that I just created. So you can see now this acts just like a regular frame. I can go to my direct selection tool, click on the image, and I can now crop the image inside of there. I can also resize it as well. So for the next part of the tool, I'm going to just undo this here to get to where I started before. So here's my frame again. I'm going to go to my pen tool, click and hold. And anytime you have a tool where the small little black arrow in the corner there, that means there's more tools underneath it. And so in this case, when I click and hold, I have an option to add anchor points. So as I do that, I can go to anywhere on that frame edge. I can add another anchor point. And you can hardly see them, they're very small there, but it'll add another anchor point each time you click on one of those different areas. Next thing I can do is also a delete anchor point. So I can go in and say I want to remove this anchor point right here. And when it does that, it actually resizes the frame by removing that anchor point and then reconnecting the ones right beside it. So I can just continue to delete anchor points until I get the shape that I'm looking for. Now if you want to modify these anchor points at any point or resize this frame, you can go to the direct selection tool like we did before. You can go to any one of these small anchor points that are on your object. And you can modify and change and twist those different anchor points, and they will swivel on each other. And then after that, we're going to go over the convert direction tool. And so this is takes this frame edges here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create some shape or some curves to them. So we're going to click and drag on one of these anchor points. You can see how the frame now bends and curves depending on where your anchor points are located. And now you have a rounded corner on that area. And you can do that the same for any other part of the object. The more you twist, the more you bend, the more it shapes it differently. Then after you've done that, you can actually grab these small, I call handlebars here, and you can continue to modify individually now. So anywhere there's an anchor point or one of these little tools, you can now click and modify and change as much as you want. So you can bend pretty much any frame into any shape that you're looking for, depending on what you're wanting to design. The next tool we're going to go through is the pencil tool. And so I'm going to just go into my direct selection tool as well, make sure the frame is highlighted, and delete that so I can make room. Now the pencil tool, if you click on it once, or click and hold, you'll see that there's three different options here. The first one is the pencil tool. This is a freehand drawing tool. So if you have a mouse or if you have a different tool on the ability to be able to draw, like a tablet or things like that, you may have that ability to hand draw something very carefully. In this case, if I were just to click and drag, it just creates a line. I can click and drag into a circle or a shape, and then we'll connect them together. Next tool underneath the pencil tool is a smooth tool. And so if you have a lot of edges from when you're using your mouse to try to create these lines and there's a bit of rough edges or it's not quite as nice as you want it, you click on the smooth tool and you click and drag over top of your line tool, and it will actually slowly start smoothing out the areas of that line. And so if you're hand drawing something and you've made a little slight jerk or movement and you want to be able to smooth that out, you can click on the smooth tool, click and drag on that line, and it will smoothen out that line. The last tool here is the erase tool. And so if you want to erase part of your line, you just click and drag over top of that line. And you can delete those different points as you need to. Next tool we're going to go over is the frame tool. And so I'm going to make some room by using my selection tool, highlighting all the objects and deleting them. So there's two different frame tools that you'll see here. One is called you'll have an ellipse, you'll have rectangular and polygon, and it says their frame in the name of the tool. And this one here beside it is just a rectangle, ellipse, or a polygon tool. Now these two tools pretty much do the exact same thing. However, the frame tool I find is much easier to work with. It actually highlights where the frame is. So for example, if I were to create a rectangular frame tool and use that to create a box, you can see that there's an X in the middle showing where the frame is, and also allows you to easily select the box. So if you were to click on it with your selection tool and move it around, it's very easy to do that. You can click anywhere on the box to move it, to change it, things like that. If I were to go into my regular tool, rectangular tool, and click on it, create a frame, or create a box. If I were to go into my selection tool again, and I wanted to highlight and move this object, I can't click anywhere inside this box to highlight it. I have to actually click on the frame edge and then be able to move it and manipulate it and change it how I need to. Now, both these frame tools, or both these tools, can be done using the same thing. So you can place images and text in either of these. There makes no difference as far as which one you use. The only reason I like using the frame tool is it allows you to have that X in the middle showing you where the frame is located and the size, and you'll be able to click on it easily and move it wherever you need to go. So I wouldn't recommend using the regular tool for creating frames and boxes. I would just use the frame tool as I find it's the easiest one to work with. Now, if you click and hold on the frame tool, you choose the ellipse or the polygon frame tool. Now, if you were to select one of those tools and just click once on your page, you're going to get a options tool where it allows you to choose the exact size that you want to place your box at. So if you can choose that, or box or circle, whatever object you've chosen, and hit OK. So it automatically creates that size by just clicking once. The other option is to click and drag to create the tool that you want, or create the box shape or the circle shape you want. If you want to create a perfect square or perfect circle, hold down your Shift key and it will size it proportionally to make it a perfect circle, a perfect square, or a perfect polygon, depending on which tool you're using. And the same will go with the polygon tool as well. The polygon width and the height, you can also choose the number of sides you want for a polygon, and you can also choose a star inset. And so this will allow you to create kind of a star shape by increasing this percentage here as much as you want. So I will just change the size here. Hit OK. And now I created a shape. I can just move it here with my selection tool. Now it creates a shape with that star inset. So if you wanted to make a star with that kind of a shape, you can do that using that option right there. Keep in mind that if you wanted to modify this object, even though it's inset at all custom, you can go into that direct selection tool on the very top of the toolbar. You can highlight just the actual frame itself, and you can modify those independently as well. Next on the toolbar is a scissor tool. And so before we do that, I'm just going to again clear off these different objects I've created. Now the scissor tool does something a little bit different. In order to use that, I'm going to actually create a copy of this image and show you how it works. And so with the scissor tool, I can click on that scissor tool. I'm going to go over to anywhere on the frame edge, and you can see that the tool changes to just a plus symbol or a target symbol. I'm going to click on that frame edge there, and then click on another frame edge on the bottom. Now, nothing much happened visually. You don't see a whole lot of changing. However, if I go back to the selection tool, and if I were to click on one side of the image and pull it off, you can see that it actually split that frame in half. And now there's two separate images inside two separate frames with the line cut in the middle. And so this allows you to separate the images or create that broken image look when you're putting images on your pages and you want to separate them slightly for a different effect. The next tool is going to have a couple of different options in it. So when I click and hold on this one beside the scissor tool, you'll see there's a transform tool, rotate, scale, and a shear tool. And so in order to use that, I'm going to first undo this last move I made here to split this frame. So this frame's back together again. Now the free transform tool allows you to click anywhere on this box, allows you to click and drag to size the box and the frame together. Whereas before we could do separate with a selection, direct selection, now we're actually doing them together. And again, it's very important whenever you're sizing with this tool, you hold on your Shift key to make sure you're sizing your images proportionally. It also allows you to rotate it by clicking outside of the frame edge. You can see the curved arrow line, and allows you to rotate that frame as well. Underneath that scale or free transform tool, we have a rotate tool. And so it does rotate the same as a free transform would, but in slightly different ways. And so if you notice anywhere on this graphic, there's going to see probably a little target area right here. That's where it's located right now, top of this image. Let's say if I want to rotate this tool based on a point outside of the frame edge. So I'm going to click on to the corner here. You can see the little target area show up right there. And now when I click and drag on the photo, it will rotate it based on that anchor point. And so it doesn't have to do it on the frame edge or in the middle of the frame. It can do it anywhere on the page where you want to rotate something based on a different point on the layout. You could also put that on the inside of the frame and rotate it that way as well. The next option we have here is the scale tool. This will allow you to scale the photo based on whatever point you want. And so before, the free transform would transform it based on a singular point where it would extend or change from. Here I can now ask it to scale it from, let's say, the top of the layout here on the top left or top of the page there. And when I size the tool or click and drag, it sizes it towards that anchor point, or it sizes away from it depending on what direction I'm going. And so it'll actually choose the anchor point that you want and size it towards or away from that anchor point. The next thing we have is a shear tool, and the shear tool allows you to bend and stretch your photo. And again, you want to be able to choose your anchor point. In this case, I'm going to choose, let's say, the top middle of this photo. And when I click and drag on this photo, it now skews that photo based on that anchor point on the very top of the image that I just clicked on. So if I undo that, let's say if I want to do the same thing again, I will click an anchor point on top of the page or top of the image. And if I click and hold Shift, it will shear it on a straight line. And now you see that the image now is tilted and it actually modifies or distorts the image as well. Now the next tool we want to go over is the Gradient Feather tool. And so I'm going to just undo this particular move that I made on this image. So now the image is back straight. Now there is a gradient swatch tool. I wouldn't recommend using that tool. If you're going to create a gradient, I would suggest going to the swatches panel, using my previous video as a tutorial to look how to create a gradient and how to apply gradients to pages. We won't use the quick tool. I don't find it very efficient and doesn't give you as much control as you would with the gradient swatch. So I'm going to move over to the Gradient Feather. Now, Gradient Feather tool allows you to feather images, basically allows you to make part of the image transparent depending on what part of the image you choose. And so in this case, if I were to take the top left of the image and click and drag toward the bottom right, you can see now it feathers the image from the top left to the bottom right to make it more transparent. And so if you put an object or an image behind it, it'd actually start to show through. So I'm going to take this image here, and I'm going to move this image to the back. And you can see now that it's behind the image, now it will show depending on how much feather there is. You can see on the top right, it's not going to show through at all. Top left, and then the bottom right, it does show through. And so this can be done for backgrounds. Whatever's behind that photo will now be transparent in that area. Now, the last tool I'm going to go over in this video is the Eyedropper tool, which has a couple of different options. There's a color theme tool, an eyedropper, and a measure tool. Now the color theme tool is somewhat unique. If you were to click on that tool and click anywhere on one of your images, what you're going to get is a color sampler here on the bottom. So I'm just going to move this up toward the image. And so this color sampler gives you a theme of colors based on what you selected. And so it allows you to choose colors that are similar, that look the same. So if you want to apply these to your page or want to frame the colors around a certain photo or image that you have, you click on that with that tool and it will show you a number of different colors that you can use, that you can apply to different parts of your page. Now, if you like these colors, you can go in here and click on this button. It'll add those to your color swatches. And so if I click on that, and I'll go over to my swatches panel, I'll just extend it here. You can see that it created a muted theme here, and that's the theme based on these colors that I have here. If you want to modify them before you add them, you can also go into here and it'll give you suggestions to make them brighter or darker or deeper, things like that. And so you can use that tool to create now a color theme based on images on your page. Now keep in mind that if your images on your page are using RGB color, red, greens, and blues, and you create this color theme, it's going to be creating RGB colors for your pages. And now we don't print an RGB color in our presses, and so it have to be converted to CMYK, so there could be a color shift while you're doing that. So if you're going to use this tool, I would highly recommend that you change your images either in Photoshop or another manipulation program to CMYK before you place them, so that way you're going to get actual CMYK values that you can use for this particular tool. Now the other tool there is the Eyedropper tool. It's a lot more straightforward. You click on the Eyedropper tool, you click onto the page, and you'll notice that a color appears in your swatches panel on the top here. And so that now allows you to use this color for anywhere else on your page based on what you clicked on your page. The last option here is the measure tool. The measure tool allows you just to click and drag and create a measurement from any location to another location. And once you do that, we're going to go over to the info panel, which is in the bottom right here. You can see in the info panel, you can see that your width and your height, it shows your angle, it shows your XY coordinates as well. And so it does give you the information and the measurements based on that. So you can see this is a 37 pica line approximately, and it shows you how high it goes from the bottom to the top. And so it gives you a really good measurement if you're trying to figure out how different parts of your elements work together as far as measurements go. So those are all the tools I'll be going through in this session. I hope this was helpful, and then you can use this for your ebook spreads. If Feel free to check out my other videos where I go over different elements like layout setup, fonts and colors, image resolution, and using styles. So check those out and enjoy the tutorials.